Uncle Adrian, you are too old to keep up with new technology.
Yes, I am old. But let's see how long the system can last without an old person.
I knew something was wrong the moment the room went silent. Silent in a place that was never supposed to be. The conveyor belts were still rattling, compressors still humming, alarms still pulsing in soft yellow along the control wall. Yet every pair of eyes in the NorthBridge control center froze on me as if I had triggered the meltdown myself. I didn't know what was coming, only that it was about to land hard. I was in the middle of reviewing a temperature variance, just another quiet, steady task in the life of a 52-year-old systems engineer when the glass door slid open. Harper Ellington walked in like she owned the building. Which, technically, her father did. HR Director Leon Briggs trailed behind her, clutching a tablet as if it might shield him from whatever was about to happen, and right at that moment, everything took a sharp turn I didn't see coming. What do you think happened next, by the way? Where are you listening from today? And listen, I just discovered a truth. Apparently 95% of you are listening without subscribing. If you hit that subscribe button now, you won't miss the next twists, the next revenge, or the next corporate meltdown, so stick around. This story's just getting started. Harper's heels clicked once, twice, and then she stopped right beside me. She didn't lower her voice, she didn't soften the blow. She just announced it, sharp enough to cut the air in half. "Adrian," she said, "this company needs younger energy. You're too old to keep up with our new technology." For a moment, I genuinely wondered if I misheard her, but the way every engineer stiffened, the way Mia Torres, the junior tech I'd been training for months, covered her mouth, told me I heard it perfectly. I didn't say a word, not one. I kept my hands on the console, kept my breath low, kept my dignity where it belonged. There's a certain kind of quiet older Americans understand, the kind that forms when you've given your life to something, only to be told you've aged out of your own usefulness. Harper wasn't done. She tapped her tablet, and the main screen behind us lit up with a performance report I had never seen before. At the very top, bolded in her bright blue font, was the phrase, "age-related inefficiency." The room didn't breathe, and somewhere beneath the sting in my chest, something colder settled in a silence I hadn't felt in years, the kind that meant this story was only beginning. When the room finally stopped buzzing from Harper's announcement, I felt something heavy settle in my chest, something between bitterness and a strange, quiet pride. It made me think, almost involuntarily, about what these people actually knew about me beyond my age. So I stood there, hands still resting on the console, and let my mind drift back over the 16 years that apparently meant nothing now. For 16 years, I built every temperature control algorithm that kept NorthBridge's food supply from rotting before it reached store shelves. I designed the humidity calculations for 23 warehouses, each with its own quirks and structural flaws. I mapped the airflow patterns to prevent moisture pockets, rewrote the predictive failure models, and created the routing logic that optimized every mile of transport when a truck left one of our facilities in the middle of summer. I was the invisible reason the produce arrived crisp, not wilted, when winter storms hit the supply chain. I was the reason shipments didn't freeze to concrete loading docks. Every day, hundreds of millions of dollars in inventory moved safely because I had spent years learning how these mechanical beasts breathed. And yet, the only label I heard today was age-related inefficiency. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Well, of course, I thought, a thin strand of sarcasm holding me together. A young woman with an 8-week future operations certificate must clearly understand thermal load distribution better than the guy who built the entire system. Mia stood a few feet away, eyes flicking anxiously between me and Harper. She wasn't naive. She had seen how the system responded to my touch, how there were calculations that lived only in my head, adjustments that required instinct, formed through years of trial, failure, and refinement. I knew she understood the truth if I walked out. The company wasn't just losing an employee, they were losing the only person who knew the real math behind their survival. But the moment that cut deepest came next. Harper stepped toward the main screen and smiled with the pride of someone unveiling a masterpiece. "And this," she said, "is our new technology transformation plan." My plan. The screen lit up with a familiar structure, almost too familiar, line by line. I recognized the formatting, the sequencing, the diagrams. Then it hit me. It was mine. The file was the exact proposal I'd drafted in 2019, rejected by leadership for being too ambitious. Now it was dressed in a new title, polished with Harper's signature, and presented as her revolutionary vision. I didn't call her out. I didn't flinch. I simply inhaled, slow and steady, letting the quiet burn settle deep. Because in that moment, I understood something she didn't. She could steal my ideas. She could claim my work. But she had no idea how to run the system behind them, and that was going to matter much sooner than she thought. It's strange how quiet a workspace can feel the moment you're no longer part of it. After Harper finished her little performance, the room slowly returned to motion. But the energy around my desk shifted into something softer, almost protective. I didn't make a scene. I didn't argue. Instead, I did what I'd always done at NorthBridge. I worked calmly, quietly, and with more dignity than they bothered to give me. I started clearing my desk one item at a time. My old thermos, a stack of handwritten notes, a couple of calibration tools I'd bought with my own money years ago. Mia stood nearby, not saying much, but the look in her eyes said everything. It wasn't pity, she respected me too much for that. It was grief. The quiet, disappointed kind, reserved for moments when something good is being thrown away for no reason at all. I slipped my small USB drive into my pocket. It didn't contain anything damaging, just training materials, reference sheets, and a few system diagrams I'd created to help the team. What I did wipe clean, however, were my personal configuration files, the little scripts and manual patches that kept 17 aging modules cooperating. They weren't sabotage. They were simply mind pieces of me I was taking back, the same way anyone removes their personal belongings when they leave a job. As I powered down my workstation, Harper appeared in the doorway, arms crossed like she was posing for a magazine cover titled, "How to Mismanage a Company." She didn't hide her smirk. "Don't worry, Adrian," she said. "You won't need to come back. I've changed all the system passwords already." I met her eyes and let a slow smile spread across my face, not mocking, not angry, just knowing. The kind of smile a mechanic gives when a teenager insists they can rebuild an engine using a YouTube tutorial. She didn't understand what she had touched. She didn't understand what held this place together. She didn't understand me. But she would. I gathered the last of my things and walked through the main control room. No one spoke, but several engineers straightened up as I passed, offering small nods of respect. I pushed open the glass door and stepped into the hallway, quiet, neutral, almost peaceful. Then, just as I reached the elevator, a soft beep echoed from inside the control room. One of the screens flickered, showing a minor temperature variance alert, barely noticeable, easily ignored. Harper didn't even turn her head, but Mia did, and in that brief second, I knew she understood exactly what was coming. I pressed the elevator button and exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle. My exit was quiet, but the consequences would not be. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the anger had drained out of me, leaving behind an odd, fragile calm. I stepped inside, hung my jacket on the same hook I'd used for 16 years, and filled the kettle. The quiet of my kitchen felt like a different planet compared to the cold, metallic hum of the control center. I poured myself a cup of tea, turned on the radio to a soft jazz station, and sat by the window as if I had nowhere urgent to be for the first time in a decade. For a moment, I simply breathed. No alarms, no shouting, no dashboards flashing warnings at me, just steam rising from my cup and a slow bass line drifting through the speakers. But peace, I've learned, doesn't last long for people like me. At exactly 2:03 p.m., my phone vibrated on the table once, then, suddenly, in a frantic, non-stop rhythm. Before I even reached for it, I heard the second vibration echo across the kitchen counter, then the third, then a cascade of alerts that sounded like a swarm of mechanical bees trying to escape. I didn't need to look to know what it meant. Still, I turned the phone over just long enough to see the words, "Critical System Alert, NorthBridge Warehouse Network Failure." I placed the phone face down again, deliberately, almost gently, and sipped my tea. The next set of vibrations came sharper, more urgent calls this time, HR. Then the technical command center, then a number I didn't recognize but could easily guess. I let every one of them ring out as I leaned back in my chair, listening to the faint crackle of the radio. Somewhere across the state, 5 different warehouses were watching their internal temperatures climb past safe thresholds. Sensors would be flashing red, alarms blaring, automated doors locking into emergency modes, frozen goods sweating into slush, produce wilting, dairy on the edge of spoilage. The entire system I had stabilized for years was collapsing exactly the way I knew it would the moment my credentials disappeared. Then came the next vibration, this one accompanied by a buzz that nearly skidded the phone across the table. It was Harper. I didn't even blink. 12 trucks were probably stalled across highways and city streets by then, unable to receive new routing instructions. Drivers stranded, dispatchers panicking, and inventory worth millions sitting on the brink of loss. Another call. Another. Then silence for about 10 seconds. It didn't last. My phone began vibrating again, this time with breaking news notifications. I finally flipped it over, not out of concern, but curiosity. And there it was, major supermarket chain reports. NorthBridge Logistics, failure delays expected statewide. The headline glowed like a flare in the dark, and somewhere in the executive offices of NorthBridge, I knew exactly what was happening. The CEO had just realized his daughter's brand new, password-protected kingdom was held together by one thing, and I had walked out with it. I took another sip of tea, letting the warmth settle in my chest. The first consequences were here, and they were only getting started. By late afternoon, my house had settled into that familiar quiet, the kind that only shows up after a storm begins somewhere far away. I had moved from the kitchen to the small workshop by the back window, trying to distract myself by sorting tools, pretending that the steady rhythm of metal against wood could drown out the vibration of my phone. It didn't. The endless calls and alerts had slowed, but not stopped. Like a failing heartbeat struggling to keep the body alive, I knew it was only a matter of time before someone showed up. At 5:40 p.m., that someone arrived. Mia's car skidded slightly as it pulled into my driveway, and before I could even set down the wrench in my hand, she was already halfway up the walkway. Her face, usually calm, focused, was flushed and tight with panic. "Scott," she blurted out the moment I opened the door. "No sap that, Roy. The whole thing is falling apart. Harper told me to follow some system recovery tutorial she found on TikTok." TikTok? Ange M. Chu? I can't do this. She was shaking, not dramatically, but in that quiet, contained way of someone trying desperately not to fall apart. I stepped aside, motioning her in, and she rushed past me into the kitchen, pacing in small frantic circles. "Sit," I said gently. "Take a breath." She sat, but breathing wasn't part of her plan. Before she could spiral any further, I opened my laptop and pulled up the private monitoring dashboard I'd built years ago, something the company never knew about. A silent view into the health of every major process. As soon as the screen lit up, Mia leaned forward. Every metric was red, every node overloaded, every system gasping for life. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Troy, oi, Adrian, this is everything. It's all failing." I nodded, not proud, not smug, just honest. "An kong lam hong gi kamia," I told her quietly. "Anchi ngung sua chua gyup ho." That's all. She closed her eyes, exhaling a shaky breath as the truth settled over her. For years, I had patched, held, reinforced, compensated an entire hidden labor built on experience and instinct. Without those hands on the system, things didn't just slow down, they broke. But then Mia's expression shifted, not just panic now, but guilt. "There's something else," she whispered. "Harper, she made me do something last week. She said it would cut our electricity waste by half." Mia swallowed hard. "She told me to disable the backup stabilization routine, the safety net. M didn't know. I didn't know it would do this." That one sentence explained everything. The moment she said it, I felt a heavy, quiet certainty settle into my chest, not anger, not satisfaction, just the inevitable weight of a mistake that had finally come due. "Mia," I said softly, "this isn't your fault." And for the first time since I walked out of NorthBridge, she wasn't the only one in the room looking for something solid to hold on to, even from miles away. I could sense the chaos spreading through NorthBridge like a shockwave, while Mia sat quietly at my kitchen table, trying to process the disaster unraveling in real time. I knew the real storm was happening inside the executive wing. And as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, that storm broke open. Back at headquarters, CEO Warren Ellington was famously composed a man who navigated shareholder meetings and multi-million-dollar contracts without raising his voice. But that night, according to the messages flooding in from the engineers still loyal to me, his composure didn't survive even 5 minutes in the conference room upstairs, surrounded by blinking red alerts and executives talking over one another. Warren exploded. Why did the entire state's supply chain die because of one person? His voice was so loud the glass walls rattled. Even reading the quote from a text later made me pause. That wasn't leadership anymore. That was fear. Harper, who had been proudly in charge less than 24 hours earlier, broke down almost instantly. Mascara streaked. She pointed at Mia's empty workstation and cried. It wasn't my fault she didn't follow instructions. She didn't reset things the way I told her. She left out the part where those instructions came from a TikTok video. Convenient. Phones were ringing non-stop, internal lines, external lines, the emergency vendor hotline. But the worst calls came from outside. News agencies were reporting logistics failures across the state. Grocery chains, big ones, were threatening legal action. $1 million worth of inventory was already at risk. And the night wasn't even over. On top of that, temperature logs were spiking across the board. Several warehouses had reached level 3 temperature deviation, which meant product loss was not theoretical anymore, it was happening. But the true turning point, the one that tipped the crisis into outright catastrophe, came from a mistake so small it could have been a footnote if it hadn't doubled their losses. A brand new technician, hired just 2 weeks ago, panicked when the alarms wouldn't stop. Trying to help, he ran an old maintenance script he found on the company wiki. What he didn't know, what no one knew except me, was that the script had been deprecated years ago because it didn't account for the new electrical draw from the upgraded HVAC units. So when he executed it, it triggered a grid sync conflict, and within seconds, the backup generators at the Houston cold storage facility cut out entirely. The largest frozen inventory hub in the network went dark. No emergency cooling, no airflow, no preservation line. In the span of 10 minutes, millions more were added to the projected loss. Warehouse staff were scrambling with flashlights, trying to manually rescue pallets of sensitive goods already thawing at the edges. The message I received from an engineer I trusted said it all. Adrian, we've never seen anything like this. They've completely lost control. And for the first time, even I felt a chill run down my spine, because this wasn't just a failure. This was the beginning of NorthBridge's reckoning. Morning came slowly, the kind of gray, heavy morning that usually follows a long night of trouble. I hadn't slept much, not because I was worried, but because the messages pouring in from old colleagues painted a picture I already expected NorthBridge was drowning. Still, I made my breakfast the way I always did, quiet, steady, unhurried. For the first time in years, I didn't have to check a dashboard before my first cup of coffee. At 7:12 a.m., a car door slammed in my driveway. Not a frantic knock, not a text, an actual car door. I glanced out the window and saw a man in a suit stepping out, adjusting his tie like he was preparing for a funeral. In a way, maybe he was. I opened the door before he could knock. "Mr. Scott," he asked, breath tight. "I'm Daniel Rowe, corporate counsel for NorthBridge. We need to speak with you." His eyes said the part he didn't say out loud. "We're about to lose the entire company." I stepped aside and motioned him in with the same calm I'd held when I walked out of the building the day before, while he paced. I turned on the kettle and pulled 2 mugs from the cabinet. He looked at me like he couldn't understand how I wasn't panicking alongside them. "Coffee," I offered. "Mr. Scott," he said, ignoring the mug. "We need you, immediately. The board is in emergency session. The CEO is well desperate. Everything is failing. Warehouses, routing, inventory integrity, everything." I stirred my cup, letting the quiet stretch long enough for him to feel it. "Funny," I said finally. "Yesterday I was too old to keep up. Today I'm indispensable. Amazing how fast time moves at NorthBridge." He swallowed, cheeks tightening. But he didn't deny it. "They were wrong," he said. "We know that now." I leaned back in my chair, fully aware of who held the leverage in the room. "All right," I said. "Emergency consulting rates apply." His shoulders stiffened. "Name your number." $620 an hour, I replied. "With 40 hours paid up front?" He blinked. "Once, twice. That's $24,800. Correct. And you require payment before I start." I said, "No exceptions." For a moment, he looked like he might protest. But then he exhaled, exhausted. "I'll call the CEO." He stepped aside to make the call, voice low, tense. I didn't need to hear the other side to know Warren Ellington was pacing a hole into his office floor. 12 minutes later, exactly 12, Daniel's phone chimed. He looked down, eyes widening. "Mr. Yitruscata, the funds are already transferred." I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the warmth fill the space between us. Finally, after 16 years of being invisible, they were listening. And for the first time, I was the one in control. The moment Daniel left my house, I moved to the dining table, opened my laptop, and logged into the remote access portal NorthBridge had just reactivated for me. The system hesitated, almost as if shocked to see me again, before the full interface loaded with a wall of flashing red. It was worse than the dashboard Mia saw. This wasn't just failure, this was structural collapse. I dove into the logs first, sifting through the error messages piling up by the second. And there it was, plain as day. Absurd as ever. Harper had installed a brand new AI plugin meant for a different version of our cooling management engine. It wasn't compatible, not even close. The mismatch created a recursive loop that forced every warehouse to repeatedly overwrite its own temperature set points. The system wasn't malfunctioning, it was arguing with itself. I breathed out slowly, equal parts disbelief and inevitability. "This," I muttered, "is what happens when someone thinks knowing how to use filters on social media qualifies them to run industrial systems." But I didn't waste time complaining. Instead, I rolled up my sleeves and began the kind of work only experience could handle for the next several hours. I stabilized the primary nodes, isolated the corrupted modules, and manually rerouted the warehouse control signals. The system fought back at every turn, but I knew its language better than anyone. Around midnight, Mia logged in from her apartment, voice shaking through the call. What do I do? Where do I start? I guided her step by step, letting her shadow my commands, showing her what to touch and what not to even breathe on. She learned quickly, sharp mind, steady instinct. In the middle of crisis, she was the one person who didn't panic. Meanwhile, Harper had been completely removed from the emergency meetings. Every time she tried to speak, the engineers ignored her, and the executives shut her down. Leadership finally realized that someone who couldn't understand the basics of system integrity had no place giving instructions. But the biggest reveal came at 3 a.m. While digging through the deeper logs, I found a set of temperature reports, deleted ones. Someone had scrubbed them days earlier. I recognized the pattern instantly. Harper had been manipulating the numbers to present record-breaking efficiency during her transition plan. In reality, she had hidden multiple temperature spikes that should have triggered investigations. That wasn't just irresponsible. It was a federal violation. I sat back for a moment, letting the weight of it settle. Not anger, just clarity. This wasn't an accident. This was a string of reckless decisions wrapped in arrogance. By the time the sun rose, the system was breathing again, imperfect, bruised but stable. And for the first time since I walked out of NorthBridge, everyone finally understood something Harper never did. I wasn't too old. I was the backbone they never respected, and now, unmistakably, the one they couldn't live without. By the time I walked into NorthBridge's executive conference room the next morning, the air felt thick, like the whole building was holding its breath. I wasn't there as an employee, not even as a consultant. Technically, I was there as the only person who understood what had truly happened. And apparently, everyone in that room already knew it. The board members sat stiffly, their faces drained of sleep. CEO Warren Ellington stood at the head of the table, shoulders heavy, eyes darker than I'd ever seen. Harper sat 2 chairs down, mascara smudged, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Mia sat quietly at the corner of the table, still unsure whether she even belonged in a room like this. Warren cleared his throat. "Adrian, please, tell us what caused the collapse." I nodded once and connected my laptop to the projector. The screen lit up with the system logs I had reconstructed overnight. No theatrics, no embellishment, just the truth layered, ugly, undeniable. "First," I began, "the AI plugin installed was the wrong version. It forced the system into a recursive loop, overwriting its own commands. That alone destabilized the entire cooling network." A murmur spread across the table. Harper shifted in her seat, eyes fixed on the floor. "Second," I continued, clicking to the next slide, "the backup stabilization sequence was manually disabled. That prevented the system from correcting itself during thermal spikes. Another slide, another truth. Third, multiple temperature logs were deleted to hide deviations. Those logs would have shown early warning signs. Without them, the system had no historical data to reference. I paused, letting that weight sink in. And finally, manual temperature overrides were pushed without verifying load capacity. That's why our largest warehouses hit emergency thresholds. The room fell into a deep, aching silence. You could hear the hum of the projectors, the distant ringing of phones outside, even the faint buzz of the lights. When I looked up, Warren wasn't staring at me, he was staring at his daughter. She looked so small in that moment, a child who had finally discovered that consequences existed. "Harper," he said softly, "is this true?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The logs spoke louder than she ever could. Warren inhaled, long and broken, effective immediately. Harper will be reassigned, elsewhere, away from system operations, indefinitely. Her face crumpled, but no one in the room protested. Then Warren turned to Mia. "Your work during the crisis and your honesty saved this company. Starting today, you will lead the automation division." Mia's eyes widened in disbelief. She looked at me first, not at the CEO, as if asking whether she deserved it. I nodded, finally. Warren faced me. "Adrian," he said quietly, "we want you back. As CTO, 70% salary increase, full authority over infrastructure, whatever you need." I held his gaze, not unkindly, but firmly. "That's generous," I said. "But I work best in places that don't make me pay for my own respect." The room froze again, not from fear this time, but from clarity. Justice wasn't loud. It was simple. It was clean. And for the first time, it was mine. In the weeks that followed the collapse, my life shifted into a rhythm I hadn't felt in years, steady, peaceful, and entirely my own. NorthBridge kept running, limping at first, then slowly regaining its footing under Mia's leadership in the newly documented systems I had rebuilt. But I never stepped foot in that building again. I didn't need to. I didn't want to. I chose something better. I accepted a handful of consulting offers from companies that didn't just want my expertise. They valued it. They didn't ask my age, didn't question my methods, didn't treat my experience like a relic from a forgotten era. They listened. They respected. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like a craftsman again, not a replaceable cog in a machine run by people who never understood what kept it alive. Between projects, I started volunteering at the local technical institute. What began as a single guest lecture turned into a regular workshop, then into a full mentoring program. Mia joined me after her promotion, sharp, steady, confident in ways she had never been allowed to be before. Watching her teach younger engineers felt like watching the beginning of something NorthBridge never deserved but desperately needed. One afternoon, after wrapping up a session, I took the long way home and found myself driving past the NorthBridge headquarters. The sun hit the glass facade just right, making the sign glow brighter than I remembered. The place looked calm, too calm, almost as if the chaos I had witnessed had never happened. I pulled over for a moment and just looked at it. The building hadn't changed, but I had. I let out a quiet laugh and shook my head. They told me I was too old. I murmured. But in the end, the system only behaved exactly the way they treated me. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't pride. It was clarity, simple and clean. When I got home, an unread email waited in my inbox, 3 pages long, from CEO Warren Ellington. A full apology, full admission, full regret. I skimmed it, nodded once, and clicked archive, not delete, just out of sight. I didn't need the last word. I already had it, because my life wasn't tied to NorthBridge anymore. It belonged to me again. Looking back, I finally understand something I never allowed myself to see. Sometimes being pushed out isn't punishment, it's release. Experience is never a burden, and age is never a weakness. The right people will recognize your value without needing a disaster to prove it. And the wrong people, they teach you when it's time to walk away. If you've ever lived through a moment like that, tell me where are you listening from today. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment. Most importantly, hit that subscribe button because I've got more stories, more lessons, and more quiet victories to share. We're just getting started.